Ever get the feeling that political debates these days are less about, like, actual issues
Yeah.
and more like all-out wars?
Yeah, I know what you mean.
It's kind of crazy,
It
right?
is.
Well, that's exactly what we're diving into today, this whole idea of political polarization and how it's fueling the rise of populism.
Mm.
We're going to be looking at this article called Political Polarization and Populism, and it goes way deeper than the usual talking points, you know?
Interesting.
Yeah, it's pretty thought-provoking.
Okay.
So when we talk about polarization, it's not just like disagreeing on policies anymore. It's like our whole identities are wrapped up in it.
Right.
It's this us versus them mentality.
Yeah.
And that's where populism really takes hold. It kind of exploits those divisions.
Yeah, I see that.
And we've all experienced this, right? Like how news and social media can feel like echo chambers,
Oh, absolutely.
just reinforcing what we already believe.
Yeah, yeah.
It's easy to blame things like economic inequality or the media for this, and those are definitely factors. But
there's more to it.
yeah, there's got to be more to it, right?
Right.
And our source today takes us deeper, looking at the cultural and psychological roots of all this.
I'm curious about that. What does it say?
Well, it talks about how globalization and all these rapid cultural shifts are impacting our sense of identity.
Makes sense.
You know, there's this tension between local and global influences. Like, think about debates around immigration or national sovereignty.
Yeah, good point.
It creates this feeling that familiar ways of life are under threat, you know?
Yeah.
And that kind of unease, it's fertile ground for polarization to take root.
It definitely feeds into that us versus them mentality.
Exactly. Okay, so we've got this clash of values happening on a global scale, but how does that actually play out in our minds? Like, is there something about human psychology that makes us so susceptible to this kind of division?
There is. Our brains have this tendency to look for information that confirms what we already believe. It's called confirmation bias, and it's a powerful force.
Confirmation bias.
Yeah, think about it. You're way more likely to click on an article or follow someone on social media if it aligns with your existing views.
That's true.
Right. So it creates these echo chambers where you rarely hear dissenting voices.
So you're just surrounded by people who agree with you.
Pretty much. And it's made even worse by the algorithms behind a lot of social media platforms.
How so?
Well, they're designed to keep you engaged, right? So they keep feeding you more and more content that reinforces your existing biases.
It's like a self-perpetuating cycle.
Exactly. It's a recipe for polarization.
That's kind of scary how easily we can get trapped in these bubbles.
It is.
But how does all this us versus them thinking actually lead to the rise of populism?
Well, you see, populism really thrives in this environment of division. Populist leaders, they position themselves as the only voice of the people, you know, the true representatives of the nation.
Okay.
And they need an enemy, right? So they target this so-called corrupt elite who they claim have failed the everyday citizen.
It's a pretty powerful narrative.
It is, especially when people are feeling disillusioned with the way things are.
Yeah, you hear that phrase a lot these days, the system is rigged.
Right.
I wonder if that's part of this populist appeal, like tapping into this feeling that traditional politics has just let people down.
Exactly. One of the big drivers of this discontent is economic inequality. Globalization has helped a lot of people, but it's also created a lot of economic insecurity.
Especially in developed countries.
Yeah. People see jobs going overseas, industries declining, and their communities struggling, and they feel left behind.
It's easy to see how that would make people feel frustrated.
Right. And populist leaders, they seize on this anxiety, you know? They promise to put our country first, often rejecting things like global cooperation or trade agreements.
It's a simple message.
It is, and it resonates with people who are struggling.
So it's not just about cultural anxieties, but also these very real economic fears.
Yeah.
But it feels like there's something more to it than just hardship.
Right, there is.
There's this broader sense of distrust, this feeling that institutions can't be trusted.
You're right. That declining trust in institutions is another big factor fueling populism. People are losing faith in political parties, the media, even experts and scientific consensus. So when you have that level of distrust, the idea of a strong leader who can just come in and fix things can be really appealing.
Even if it means breaking the rules.
Right. Even if it means bending or breaking democratic norms.
And then there's social media. It feels like a perfect tool for populist movements.
It is.
Because it allows them to bypass the traditional media and speak directly to people.
Right.
But like we talked about earlier, that can also be a breeding ground for misinformation.
Absolutely. Social media is a double-edged sword for populism.
How so?
Well, on the one hand, it lets leaders build these direct connections with their supporters, creating a sense of community and shared identity.
It's like they can control their own message.
Yeah, exactly. They can bypass the so-called gatekeepers in the traditional media.
But on the other hand,
It can also create this echo chamber effect we were talking about earlier.
where people are just getting fed a steady stream of misinformation.
Exactly. And because the algorithms are designed to keep you engaged, you can end up in these filter bubbles where you're only exposed to information that reinforces your existing beliefs.
So it's like a vicious cycle.
It can be.
Okay, so we've got these powerful forces at play: cultural shifts, economic anxieties, eroding trust, and this echo chamber effect of social media. It's kind of bleak.
It can feel that way.
But our source doesn't just leave us with despair, does it? There are some potential solutions.
There are. The article highlights some really encouraging initiatives that are focusing on building empathy and bridging divides.
Like what kinds of things?
Well, these programs are all about bringing people together from different backgrounds, encouraging them to share their personal stories and experiences.
So instead of just arguing about abstract ideas, you're connecting on a human level.
Exactly. The goal is to humanize the other, to help people see beyond those political labels.
And recognize their shared humanity.
Exactly. And hopefully start to break down some of those barriers.
I like that.
Yeah.
So it's like focusing on what connects us instead of what divides us.
Right. And that kind of ties into this whole idea of reimagining identity politics, like instead of viewing our identities just as a source of division, what if we focused on shared values and goals?
Okay.
Things that cut across political lines.
So finding that common ground, those things that unite us, despite our differences.
Exactly. Like think about movements like climate action or the push for social justice.
Okay.
These movements bring together people from all walks of life, united by a common purpose.
That's true. It's a good reminder that we're not just defined by our political beliefs.
Right.
But how do we move beyond just these feel-good ideas and into actual action,
Yeah.
How do we actually start bridging these divides?
Well, the article really emphasizes the importance of civic engagement. When people feel empowered to participate in shaping their communities and influencing policy decisions, it strengthens democracy and helps bridge divides.
It's not just about, complaining on social media.
Right.
It's about getting involved in local initiatives, attending town hall meetings, maybe even running for office.
Exactly. It's about taking ownership of the issues that matter to you and working with others to find solutions.
Right. But let's be real. Not everyone has the time or resources to be a full-time activist.
Yeah.
Plus, with all the misinformation out there, it can be hard to even know where to start or what to believe.
That's a good point, and that's where education comes in, particularly media literacy.
Yep.
We need to equip people with the tools to critically evaluate information, to identify bias, and to understand how these algorithms shape what they see online.
So being more discerning consumers of information.
Exactly. There are some great organizations out there offering workshops, online resources, even school curricula focused on media literacy.
Right.
It's all about empowering people to navigate this complex information landscape.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
Okay, so we've talked about empathy, civic engagement education. Those are all important pieces of the puzzle.
Right.
But is there anything in the article about how we could actually change the way politics works? Like, are there alternative models that could help reduce polarization?
There are. Yeah, the article touches on some innovative political models. One that stood out to me was this idea of deliberative democracy.
Deliberative democracy?
Yeah.
I'm not familiar with that.
So it's basically a system that focuses on bringing people together from different backgrounds to discuss issues and try to find common ground.
Interesting.
It prioritizes consensus building and collaboration over the kind of adversarial debate that we see in our current system.
That sounds promising in theory.
Yeah.
But is it realistic? Can you really get people with such opposing views to sit down and have a productive conversation?
It's definitely a challenge.
Especially in today's world.
It is. But there are some real-world examples of deliberative democracy in action.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Some cities and countries have experimented with citizen assemblies.
Citizen assemblies.
Yeah, where they bring together randomly selected citizens to deliberate on specific issues and make recommendations to their governments.
So it's like a microcosm of the larger society.
Right.
But with a focus on dialogue and finding common ground.
Exactly. And, these experiments have shown that it is possible for people from different backgrounds to come together,
Mhm.
have respectful discussions, and find common ground. It's not about everyone agreeing on everything,
Right.
but it's about understanding different perspectives and working towards solutions that benefit everyone.
That gives me some hope, I gotta say.
Yeah.
But I also can't help but wonder, like, if things keep going the way they are,
Yeah.
with all this polarization and the rise of populism, what are the potential consequences down the road?
It's a good question, and it's something the article definitely addresses. If we continue down this path of division and distrust,
It could lead to things like increased social unrest, political instability, even violence.
yeah, this isn't just some abstract political theory.
Right.
It has real-world implications. We've seen it happen in other countries
Absolutely.
where political polarization has led to violence.
And as trust in institutions continues to erode, it creates this opening for authoritarian leaders
Hmm.
who exploit the situation and promise easy solutions to complex problems. And that further erodes democratic norms.
That's a scary thought.
It is. It's something we need to be aware of.
Yeah, but knowing all this, understanding these forces at play, it feels like a first step, right?
It is bare. Awareness is key.
Yeah.
By recognizing the underlying drivers of all of this,
Mm-hmm.
we can start to address them. We can choose to engage in more constructive dialogue,
Okay.
support initiatives that promote empathy and understanding, and advocate for political reforms that prioritize collaboration over conflict.
So it's not about giving up or feeling helpless.
Right.
It's about choosing to be part of the solution.
Yeah. It can feel overwhelming, though, can it? Like,
Yeah.
what can one person really do in the face of all this?
Right.
But then I go back to that idea of reimagining identity politics, like finding those points of connection. We're all part of this bigger story, right?
We are, and I think that's so important to remember,
Yeah.
every conversation we have, every action we take, it all matters. Even if it seems small, it can make a difference.
I like that.
It's about choosing hope over cynicism,
Okay.
engagement over apathy.
Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground in this deep dive.
Yeah.
From those psychological biases that make us so vulnerable to polarization,
Right.
to the economic anxieties that are fueling populism.
Mm-hmm.
And then there were those glimmers of hope, those alternative models and solutions.
Yeah.
What's the one thing you hope our listener takes away from all of this?
I hope they walk away feeling empowered. I really do.
Hmm.
The future isn't predetermined. We have a say in how it unfolds. By understanding these forces, polarization and populism,
Huh?
by engaging in thoughtful dialogue, and by demanding more from our systems,
Yeah.
we can create a world where differences are seen as strengths, not threats.
That's fantastic. I love
Yeah.
that. We're not just passive observers here.
Or
We're
not.
the agency.
We do.
So stay curious, stay engaged, and keep seeking out those diverse perspectives.
Couldn't agree more.
Because that's how we build a better future.
Right.
One conversation at a time.
Absolutely.